Twin-stick shooters are sort of my jam. I have loved playing them for quite some time, and always enjoy discovering new ones to try. Games like Robotron 2084, Smash TV, and even lesser-known indie titles like I Made a Game with Zombies in It are all enjoyable to me, and I play them quite a bit. So when I first learned about Space Dungeon and found out that it was a twin-stick shooter on the 5200, I just knew I had to give it a try. But it's easier said than done in today's retro gaming world, because by definition of the genre, you will need two working Atari 5200 joysticks, along with some sort of device to hold them. Well, I guess that'd be more of a convenience, not a necessity, but still. My solution was actually to pick up a broken 5200 controller with a working joystick component, and then getting a joystick holder from GoodDealGames.com. With this setup, I was able to get going with Space Dungeon for only a small $50-ish investment into the control situation. But if you want to go premium, you could end up spending much, much more. This is good enough for me, however, so let's not delay and get into Space Dungeon, the Atari 5200 Supersystem's unique twin-stick shooter from 1983. Space Dungeon was originally developed for the arcade by Taito and was released in 1982. The Supersystem version saw release about a year later and was published by Atari themselves. The original release had a dual joystick holder with it, but it's not likely to include this if you pick it up today. I mean, you can find them, but it's much harder to get the complete set. Anyway, upon booting the game, you are greeted with the title screen and the ability to choose between one-player, two-player, or a demonstration mode. Now to clarify, this game can be played somewhat with a single stick, but if you ask me, it just doesn't function properly and it's not recommended. Two sticks is the optimal way to play. When you start the game, you're presented with a map in the upper center of the screen, along with your score, what level you're on, the number of lives you have left, and a treasure counter. And that's to the left of the map. And below that you have a window that shows the current room you're in, and this is basically the playfield. You can use the stick in port 1 to move, and by moving the stick in port 2 you shoot in 8 different directions. The controls work well and are responsive and nicely done. The HUD shows everything you would need to know. Technically, the playfield is quite a bit smaller than some people would expect, but really, the small size is not noticeable, and wasn't an issue at all while playing. Looking at the map, you can see what rooms you've already entered, what rooms you are currently in, as designated by the white flashing inset square, and you can see where the exit is by finding the rainbow flashing square. You can see the location of the deadly, unkillable thief as well. When you die, you drop all your treasures, but the room where you lost all your booty is shown with an X on the map. And truthfully, the goal of Space Dungeon is in collecting as much treasure as you can, and getting out of each level alive. The treasure gives you a ton of points, depending on what all you've collected, and is your primary way of getting additional lives. And you're going to need these lives, because Space Dungeon is not an easy game. The difficulty is high, and a lot of it has to do with the enemies spawning out of nowhere, and spamming their fire fast and furiously. But it creates a great sort of balance where you can either run to the exit to progress further and just get any treasure you find along the way, or you can purposely explore each level, grabbing all the goodies you can. The thief is also picking up treasure, and even though you can't kill him, you can cause him to drop his own goodies by shooting him. This way you can sort of use him to collect treasure on one side of the map, while you do another, and then shoot him for a lot of score and inevitably bonus lives. The other enemies you come across are no slouch, and they need to be dealt with quickly and efficiently. But they all sort of look like random shapes and designs to me, and it can be hard to distinguish treasure and bad guys when you first get started. But here's the secret. If it moves, shoot it. If it stays still, then collect it. Simple as that. But again, when you're just learning, the game can be a tad confusing in this department. There are random rooms in every level that you can look at the map to find, that has a rectangle that acts as the exit, and you'll simply enter this area to move on. At this point, your score and treasure is counted, bonus lives are awarded, and you're given a silly little rhyme as you progress to the next level. Things like, "It's not heaven" in level 7, and "Doing fine" in level 9. It's cheesy, but a cheeky nod to your progress. Once you reach level 10, the game states that, well, it's out of rhymes, and that's the last you'll see of that component. It's odd, but it's a fun little extra, and it really has no bearing on anything. Graphically, the game isn't much to write home about. It's all simple shapes, rectangle level designs, and straight line bullets. But most of the enemies sort of explode into lots of little shards when shot and destroyed, and it's actually a cool effect that adds some depth and charm to an otherwise simple game graphically. The audio is pretty good though, with tons of bass-filled Atari patented explosions, simple sirens going off here and there, and the sound of your laser and enemy bullets flying about. Now, lately this stuff has been getting on my nerves, but I can honestly say I wasn't offended by the audio in Space Dungeon. It all sounded very classic arcade, and I'm sure it'll be nostalgic for some to hear. It's a shame that there really isn't any music to speak of, but honestly you don't end up missing it too much with all the chaos. And I doubt you would have heard much of it anyway with all the crazy sound effects blaring in the background. But I do have two criticisms to levy against Space Dungeon. Let's start with the lesser of the two. Space Dungeon is hard. I think I'm pretty good at twin-stick shooters, and I've always done well in games like Robotron 2084. But Space Dungeon really gave me a lot of challenge. At first, I had the feeling that it wasn't a fair challenge. As I stated earlier, the enemies had a tendency to spawn out of nowhere, and I would run into them or their bullets and die quickly. It felt very cheap at times. But there is method behind the madness, and I learned that when no enemies are present, I should shoot in the direction that I'm heading in. That way, nobody could get the jump on me when progressing to new rooms. But even when armed with this knowledge, Space Dungeon continues to be a huge challenge on the Supersystem. So be prepared to go to war over the treasure within this cartridge. My second complaint is the slowdown that occurs when things get hectic. You really start to appreciate the 7800's advanced sprite pushing capabilities after playing this one. And when things get busy in Space Dungeon, it gets slow. I really just hate slowdown in video games in general, and this one has a fair amount of it. It doesn't detract from the game too much, but it's noticeable when it happens, and it may have cost me a life or two while gathering footage for the review. But I think that's all there is to say about Space Dungeon on the Atari 5200. It's a neat little hidden gem that requires a little extra effort to play, but is it worth it? Well, why don't we head into the next room of this galactic jail, and enter the rectangle known as the pros and cons section to find out. For pros, I have to say that the game controls beautifully with twin sticks. As long as you have two working joysticks, you are in business, but I recommend getting a holder to make things easier on yourself. Even though this game is very simple looking, the graphics aren't bad, and there are some nice effects when shooting and destroying enemies. The sound is nostalgic arcade fare that I really enjoyed. It's easy to get sucked into Space Dungeon, and there is a lot of game here to play, so most 5200 fans should get their money's worth while playing this. The treasure collecting aspect is a nice touch, and it adds a little something extra to the twin-stick shooting formula. But we do have some cons, and first, let's talk about the difficulty. It's hard, and early on, I'd say it even borders cheap. But once you learn how to play the game, it becomes much more accessible. Still hard though. You'll need two working joysticks too, which is actually a big ask on the 5200. But you can get everything you need for a fairly cheap price if you shop around a bit. And finally, there is some slowdown present. When a lot of stuff is on the screen, you can count on the slowdown to come around. And that's really it for Space Dungeon. So with all that said, after weighing the pros and cons, I have no hesitation in giving Space Dungeon 4 rebuilt CX52 joysticks out of 5. The game is great fun, and it'll hold your attention for a good long while. There are some issues, but they're very forgivable when the game is just so much fun. I recommend it. But you all heard what I had to say, so now I want to hear from all of you. Have you played Space Dungeon before? Do you agree with my review? Are you a fan of twin-stick shooters? Or are these games just not for you? Why or why not? And what game should I look at next on the Atari 5200? Let me know about all this and more in the comments down below. And please, leave a like before you go and subscribe if you haven't already. I cover all things Atari, so if you like that, well, then you'll want to subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon and YouTube memberships. And these following people have already signed up for them. Thanks to them, I can continue to cover all things Atari, replace and upgrade equipment, and do fun giveaways. Link to the Patreon is in the description. Thank you to everybody who has signed up. I couldn't possibly thank you enough. And with all that, it's time to wrap up this review of Space Dungeon on the Atari 5200. I've been the 7800 Pro Gamer, a man who lets thieves rob space stations blind and then I shoot them and take their goods, on a planet known as the Atari Network. And I'd like to thank you all for watching. And until next time, remember to stay classy, Atarians.